My father looked me straight in the eye the moment I called from the hospital and said, "That's not my problem." No hesitation, no warmth, just a clean severance from the one person I thought would always show up for my son. While Max sat crying in the emergency room with a broken arm, my parents continued their dinner plans as if his pain meant nothing. I didn't scream. I didn't beg. I went silent. So silent it frightened even me. And 5 days later, the calls started. Before I tell you what happened next, tell me, would you have forgiven them or would you have walked away, too? I should probably tell you who I was before everything shattered. I'm Rebecca, 29, a single mom who spent most of her 20s learning how to appear steady even when everything inside is trembling. Coworkers call me dependable, unshakable, calm in crisis. They don't know it's a defense mechanism I developed long before I entered the workforce. Our apartment sits on the 3rd floor of an old building, a small space filled with secondhand furniture and handmade curtains. Nothing extravagant, but secure. Security matters when you're raising a 6-year-old who still believes people will always be there when he needs them. Max has my stubborn streak, but not my scars. And I've fought hard to keep it that way. He builds elaborate block towers, asks impossible questions about space, leaves toy cars in places that make me stumble in the dark. I want him to feel protected in ways I never was. My parents live 20 minutes away in a house that always feels more like a museum than a home. My father, Richard, carries his disappointment like a badge, sharp, visible, unchanging. When I was young, he'd tell me I was too emotional, as if caring deeply were a weakness I needed to overcome. My mother, Patricia, learned decades ago how to maintain harmony by erasing herself. And she's refined that erasure into an art form so complete it's almost ghost-like. Still, I tried. Birthdays, Thanksgiving, monthly visits. I appeared even when it drained me. I kept hoping fatherhood might soften him, that being a grandfather might thaw something cold and rigid inside him. Sometimes he'd lift Max onto his shoulders with a tight smile. And for a moment, I'd glimpse a different version of us, one I'd imagined since childhood. But underneath everything, there was always a hairline fracture. Small criticisms, quick rejections, moments where he treated Max like an obligation, not a grandson. I overlooked them, smoothed them over, convinced myself that maintaining connection was the same as maintaining family. Then came that evening in early spring, the call from the school nurse, the accident, the terror, and my father's voice cold and final, cutting through the chaos of the emergency room like it had been waiting decades for the perfect moment to strike. It didn't just break something. It exposed what had been fractured all along. You ready for the moment everything changed? The hospital never should have taken so long to reach me, but by the time I burst through those doors, the damage was already done. Max was sitting on an examination table, clutching his left arm, tears streaking his face. A kind nurse sat beside him, speaking softly, but she wasn't me. And she wasn't family. When he saw me, he didn't leap into my arms the way he normally would. He just whispered, "It hurts, Mommy," and my heart cracked clean through. That night, after I'd settled him on the couch with ice cream and his favorite movie, I kept replaying everything. My father's clipped words. The way he'd hung up before I could finish explaining. The way the nurse had apologized, saying they'd tried his emergency contacts repeatedly. I wanted to blame the universe, but that lonely hour in the belonged to one person, Richard. Still, the old pattern surfaced. Give it time. Don't overreact. Don't create conflict you can't win. I'd spent my entire life choosing softness against his hardness, believing peace was worth any personal price. 5 days passed before the first text arrived. Then another, then another. First my aunt's message, "Your dad says he needs to talk." What's going on? Then my mother's friend Diane, my mother's Diane, not mine, sounding uncertain, she mentioned things are tense. Did something happen? Then my mother herself, tentative and strained, "Your father's upset. Can you please call him?" None of them mentioned Max. Not one. By then, I had already slipped into a familiar, strangely steady calm. I wasn't ignoring them to inflict pain. I simply had nothing left to offer. But the turning point didn't come from the messages. It came later that week when Max and I were at the bookstore near my parents' neighborhood. I rarely went there, too many memories, but Max needed a book for a school project. And it was near Diane's house for a playdate he'd been anticipating all week. We were halfway through the children's section when I heard his voice. Rebecca. Not gentle, not concerned, just surprised. Max turned first. He offered a small, cautious wave, nothing like the enthusiastic hugs he used to give his grandfather. Richard bent down, arms extended, but Max didn't move. He glanced at the book in his hand and asked me if he could get the one about rockets instead. My father straightened slowly, his expression shifting for the first time in years. "Why are you here?" he asked. "We're going to Diane's," I said. "For a playdate." The way his face froze told me everything. He finally felt it, the absence, the distance, the consequences. And for the first time in my adult life, I didn't rush to fill the silence. Richard stared at me as if the sentence were spoken in code he couldn't decipher. "Diane's? Why would you go there?" His voice sharpened, the same edge he'd used on me my entire childhood. An edge designed to correct, to diminish, to pull me back into line. But I didn't respond. I didn't owe him the gentleness he'd never given me. He forced a smile, too bright, too strained. "Well, I could come along. I haven't seen Max in a while." Before, I might have hesitated, considered, tried to smooth things over. But that version of me had dissolved in a hospital waiting room while my son cried alone. "No," I said simply. "You're not invited." The color drained from his face. I watched the shock wash over him, a silent, almost physical recoil. He stepped closer, his cologne too familiar, too oppressive. "Rebecca, this is ridiculous. You're still upset about that hospital thing. You know I was at dinner. You know you're being dramatic. Why drag this out?" Dinner. Dramatic. Drag this out. The same script he'd used since I was old enough to need him. I crouched beside Max, who was comparing two rocket books like the world wasn't crumbling behind us. "Are you ready?" I asked. He nodded, placed the book in our basket, and slipped his hand into mine. We walked past Richard without another word. That night, 6 text messages waited on my phone. One angry, one defensive, one from my mother begging me to reconsider, one demanding I think about Max. I didn't read them twice. I didn't respond. And that silence, the very thing he'd always wielded against me, suddenly belonged to me. Days passed. My mother texted the way she always did, not to acknowledge what happened, not to ask how Max felt, but to urge me back into my role as the family's emotional shock absorber. "You've made your point. Your father is miserable. What do you want from him?" But she didn't understand. This wasn't a point. It was a boundary. Then came the letter. Thick, official, too formal for anything good. I almost tossed it, but instinct stopped me. Inside was a legal notification. My parents had revised their will. I was no longer the executor. My brother Daniel, who once called Max needy for crying during a thunderstorm, was now in control. It was meant to wound me. Instead, it crystallized everything. I placed the letter on the counter. No rage, no tears, just a quiet, solid certainty settling into my chest. They wanted distance, so I gave it to them. But even as I stepped back, I sensed something larger approaching, some shift I could feel but not name yet. Like the pressure before a thunderstorm. And storms always force a reckoning. By mid-April, I had grown accustomed to the quiet. Not peaceful quiet, the kind that settles after turbulence, but stillness that smells like aftermath. My phone barely buzzed anymore. When it did, it was a brief text from my mom, a guilt-soaked voicemail from my father, or a curt reminder from Daniel about some family matter I hadn't acknowledged. I'd stopped answering. I'd stopped explaining. I'd stopped trying to repair what none of them wanted to face. And in the stillness, Max changed too. He no longer asked when we'd see Grandpa or why we didn't visit on Sundays anymore. He just moved through our small apartment with a softer, steadier confidence, as if he'd learned in his own quiet way that safety is not a place, but a person. Then on a frigid Tuesday night, the storm finally broke. It was just past 11 when my phone lit up. I didn't recognize the feeling in my chest when I saw the name. It wasn't fear. It wasn't worry. It was something closer to resignation, an exhausted acknowledgement that whatever came next had been building for years. I let it ring. One call, then another. When I finally checked, there were 4 missed calls from my mother. Then a text, "Your father fell down the basement stairs. His knee's badly injured. I can't lift him. Can you come help?" For a moment, I pictured the scene. The steep basement stairs he'd always refused to repair. The dim lighting he insisted was fine. The handrail that wobbled when you gripped it. And him, Richard, angry, cold, stunned that the world wasn't accommodating his stubbornness. The part of me that had spent my childhood seeking his approval flinched, a reflex, not desire. But the image that came after erased everything, Max on that examination table. Small body trembling, tears falling, waiting for someone who never came. I typed one word, "No." And I put my phone face down. I slept better than I had in months. In the morning, sunlight cut a clean line across my bedroom floor. My phone showed 9 more missed calls and 3 voicemails, one frantic, one crying, one threatening. I didn't press play. Instead, I called Diane and asked if she wanted to take Max to the science center. She said yes, without hesitation. That's who she was, steady, present, gentle where my father was harsh. We spent the day wandering through interactive exhibits, laughing at Max's excitement when he launched a foam rocket, and eating pizza at a place that smelled like oregano and childhood. At no point did Max ask where my parents were. The next wave came through Daniel. He called late in the afternoon, his voice pitched somewhere between concern and condescension. "Your dad tore ligaments in his knee," he said. "Your mom's overwhelmed. They've been struggling for 3 days. Maybe you should consider being the bigger person here." I almost laughed. Bigger person. As if I hadn't spent my entire life being exactly that. "I already am," I said. "That's why I'm keeping Max away." He sputtered, caught off guard. "You don't mean, I do." I hung up before he could finish. The next day, an email arrived. Long, meandering, full of sentences that almost resembled apologies but never quite landed. The kind my dad always constructed when he needed something, not when he understood something. "I'm sorry things got out of hand. I miss you both. Family should stick together. I don't know how we ended up here." Every line skirted the real issue. Not once did he mention Max in that emergency room. Not once did he admit what he'd done. I closed it and went on with my day. By late April, the temperature dropped unexpectedly. The streets glistened with a thin layer of frost that seemed to grip the whole city. I bundled Max in his warmest jacket and hat, and we drove to a spring festival in a neighboring town. He wanted to try the face painting booth. He held my hand the entire time. On the drive back, Diane spotted a car pulled over on the shoulder, a silver sedan with hazard lights blinking in the gray twilight. She said my name softly. I slowed just enough to see through the rain-streaked windows. It was my parents. My dad leaning heavily on a cane. My mom standing beside the open hood, her face pale. They looked small in a way I'd never seen them. Like the world had finally handed them a mirror instead of a platform. For a moment, I hovered on the edge of stopping, not because I felt obligated, but because the child I used to be still lived somewhere in my bones. Then Max looked up from the back seat, humming a tune as he traced shapes on the window. I pressed the gas. When we got home, I made dinner while Max showed Diane his painted dragon face. The hum of the radiator, the clatter of dishes, the soft laughter, it all felt like a life I'd built intentionally, piece by piece, without realizing it. But even then, I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel victorious. I felt complete. That night, as I tucked Max into bed, he showed me a drawing. A small blue apartment. Three stick figures, me, Max, and Diane. Max in the middle, holding both our hands. "Can I hang it on the wall?" he asked. "Of course." He paused before climbing under the covers. "Mom, do I still have a grandpa?" The question caught me off guard, not because of its content, but because he asked it without anger, without sadness, just curiosity, like he was reorganizing the world in his mind and trying to understand where everything fit now. "Yes," I said softly. "But things are complicated." He nodded in that wise, unassuming way children sometimes do. Maybe he forgot how to be nice. After he fell asleep, I stared at that drawing until the room blurred. In all my hurt, in all my protecting, I had forgotten the simplest truth. Max had his own story, his own feelings, his own understanding of family. And maybe he wasn't ready to erase people the way I had been forced to. So I picked up my phone and for the first time in weeks typed a message. "Do you want to see Max next weekend?" No apology, no conditions, just an opening. My father replied in 4 minutes, "Yes. Please." The following Saturday, we met at a park. Neutral ground, cold but brighter than the weeks before. My parents sat on a bench like people uncertain whether they were welcome. Max approached them slowly, then turned to me for permission before saying hello. They said it back. Then he asked, "Grandpa, will you watch me climb?" My father looked stunned. Not triumphant, not relieved, just stunned. He looked at me. I nodded. And in that moment, small, fragile, real, the storm finally began to settle. My father walked toward the climbing structure as if the ground beneath him might crack. He stood at the base, one hand on his cane, and watched Max carefully. Max climbed slowly, glancing back occasionally, not for encouragement but for confirmation that someone was watching. My parents didn't rush, didn't overstep, didn't try to claim a place they hadn't earned. They simply existed in the background, quiet, tentative, aware. For the first time, that silence wasn't a weapon. It was space. I sat on a nearby bench, watching the scene unfold with a strange blend of relief and ache. I wasn't healed. Neither were they. But the sharp edges inside me had softened, rounded by time and distance, and the realization that my power had never come from punishment. It came from protection, protecting Max, protecting myself. The visit lasted less than an hour. No speeches, no forced apologies, just small, careful steps. When it was time to leave, my parents didn't ask for more. They simply nodded, grateful for what they'd been given. A week later, my mom emailed me a flyer for Max's school concert, asking if they could attend, only if it's okay, with you. I said yes, with boundaries. They followed everyone. They stayed in the back, clapped quietly, and left without trying to rewrite history. Another drawing appeared on our wall soon after. Same blue apartment, but now 5 figures. And for the first time, the picture didn't hurt. It felt like a beginning. Not perfect, but possible. In the end, nothing returned to the way it was, and that was the point. We didn't rebuild the old version of our family. We built a quieter, sturdier one, shaped by boundaries instead of fear. Max felt safe again, and I finally understood that protecting him would always matter more than keeping the peace. If this story stayed with you, tell me what moment hit hardest. And if you've ever had to draw a hard line with family, you're not alone.